industry of DevOpsing for a long time and do a lot of work with software development, automation, testing, and observing, observability style for DevOps. In my spare time, I also like to play music, ride bikes, and I take some amateur photographs for fun. Enough about me. Let's jump into prereqs. So we're hoping everybody follows along with this and tries to work through the stuff with us. So to do that, you'll need a few things, Docker and Docker Compose. So if you're running Mac or Windows, hopefully you're running Mac. That's what I'm running. Some of this stuff I haven't really tested on Windows, but it should generally work. Grab Docker if you don't have it. Grab Docker Compose if you don't have it. The newest version of Docker Desktop for Mac and Windows actually has Docker Compose built in. So that would make it easier. Hopefully you've already got it. We also need to fork this repository or at least clone it. You want to have a copy locally so that you can work from within this directory. So git clone this URL, and we've got that in the chat window. Again, check your Zoom chat, make sure you're seeing the content there, because that's where a lot of support and help is going to be coming from. So clone this directory, get yourself a terminal window, drop into it, or use an IDE preferably, so you can be editing files as well. We're going to edit a lot of YAML today. Then finally, if you want to go ahead and Docker pull StackHawk/hawkscan, that will get our scanner container downloaded for you, so you're kind of ready to start scanning. That's a pretty big download. Might as well start now. Get ahead of the game. While you're working on that, again, all this is in the chat window. Want to reiterate that please ask questions. Got a lot of help in the chat. Aaron Neff is here. He's our customer success engineer, actually got a new title, recently promoted. I can't remember what the title is. But anyway, he's done a ton of this. I've actually consulted with him several times as I put this whole thing together.
And I'm just going to add on to that, Zach. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, either privately to panelists, and Zach and Aaron will be able to help you one-on-one with those. Or if you have a question and you want to kind of discuss it as a group, feel free to drop that in the chat to panelists and attendees. I'll be here to kind of pass those along to Zach so we can get you an answer as we go throughout this session. Like we mentioned, we want this to be super hands-on. Zach is great at kind of helping folks as we go through this, so that we're here to help either way you feel comfortable with.
All right, so what are we talking about here today? We're going to do some authenticated DAST scanning, specifically with StackHawk. And the idea here is that we want to scan our API or our web services and look for vulnerabilities in them. And DAST scanning is a particular way of doing that involves testing the running application, so sending probes in. DAST stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing. And the way it works is you fire up your web application or your RESTful API or GraphQL endpoint, what have you. And you take a scanner and you start probing that application with a set of preset probes. And the scanner then analyzes the responses that it gets from those probes. And based on the responses, it reports on any security bugs that it thinks that it found in your application. You can get a lot out of DAST scanning, even if you're not authenticated to your application. But if you do authenticate to it, of course, you're going to find a lot more stuff. So most apps, especially these days, protect a lot of content behind authentication. And so authenticating will grant you access to a lot more routes. And usually that's where most of the sensitive content is protected. So especially like GraphQL endpoints, for instance. So that's what we're doing today. Now, this is a really complicated topic. So we had to carve it down to a specific set of things. So we've identified kind of the most common methods of authentication and the most common methods of authorization. So authentication, or authn, is where you're transacting with the application to send in your credentials and prove who you are to the application. And then authorization is what happens after. Once you've identified yourself to the application, you are authorized to go and do things. And there are two different processes. So what we'll be looking at today in terms of authentication is, first off, form authentication. So in this method, user fills in some HTML form fields, hits submit. Those values are sent in as parameters through a post request to the endpoint, to the application endpoint. And then the server evaluates those credentials. And then it does something to authorize you in the future. The next method of authentication, or authn, that we'll be looking at is JSON post. So this is pretty typical of single page applications today. This is where you fill in, again, a form, but this time it's generated by JavaScript. And you're going to post the results from that as a JSON body rather than traditional parameters. And you're also going to post it through something called XHR. But basically, you're just posting a JSON blob with your credentials, your username and your password, to an API endpoint. Again, the server then evaluates your credentials and authorizes you. And then finally, we'll look at a third-party auth if we have time, which basically says, hey, go to the app, and we say, hey, I want to log in. The app redirects you to a third-party site like Google or Auth0 or Ping Identity, so forth. You authenticate with that third party. Then the third party returns you with an access token back to your application. An access token or a cookie. It's complicated, but basically you're authenticating with somebody else, and then it's going to set up your authorization flow, which comes next. So then, separate from authn is authz, the authorization flow. This is where you have already authenticated and you've got some method of proving to the server over and over each time you make requests that you are authorized to do stuff. So traditionally, old style web apps use a session cookie, and new ones do too, but this is an older style. So once you've authenticated, the server establishes with you, it sets a cookie in your browser, and then you send that cookie back every time you make requests to the server in the future. And that cookie, the application knows about that cookie. It looks it up in its database or tables or whatever. It says, yeah, that's Jake, and he's authorized to do this stuff. And then a more modern way that single page applications typically use is the bearer token, some form of token that is included in request headers that you send with every request. So the one we're going to look at today is a JOT or JWT. It's a JSON web token. And once you've got this big cryptographic token, it just is going to be included every time you make a request to the API server. You'll have a header called authorization, and then it'll have the bearer token as the value of that authorization token. So authn and authz. To simplify this even further, actually, I should stop, see if there's any questions. So to simplify this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just saying we haven't gotten anything yet.
Cool. All right. So next, we're going to do 3 scenarios that try and combine these forms of authn and authz. First one is form auth with cookie authz. So we're going to supply a username and password, a CSRF parameter name, which I'll explain a little bit later, the session cookie name that we're going to use for the authorization, and a test page to validate authorization. That's the information that we need to configure HawkScan, the StackHawk scanner. Next scenario is JSON authn with token authz. So again, we'll need a username and password. We'll need an authorization header name. So this is the request header that the scanner is going to need to send in with every request. And then a test page to validate that we're authorized. And then finally, we'll do an external auth-in with token auth-z. We're going to need a script. We're not really going to script it. I'm just going to show you what the elements of the script will be. A script to go authenticate and get your authorization token. Then we'll have the bearer token. We'll have an authorization header name like before and a test page to validate that we're authorized. And in this case, this can be a really complicated subject, the external authentication. And the trick always is, how do we generate a token from your external service provider so that we can provide that to the scanner? And usually that's a script that we're going to write and add to our flow anytime we scan. So this brings me to StackHawk, which is the company that we all work for. And we have a scanner called HawkScan. And it's based on the open source OWASP ZAP scanner, which is the most popular open source scanner out there. We actually have hired Simon Bennett. He's the originator and current maintainer of the project. So our scanner, HawkScan, is based on that, and it's packaged as a Docker container. It's got a simple YAML configuration. It's easy to integrate into CI/CD. In fact, that's sort of our primary drive for this application, is to make this automatable so you can be scanning at every time you check in code. We've got an online platform backing it so that you can track all of your scan results. We've got an integration for Slack so that you can be notified every time you run a scan. And we've got a Jira integration so that you can more effectively triage and collaborate with teammates anytime the scanner finds issues. So with that introduction, let's get started with our first scan. So hopefully you've downloaded, you've done a Docker pull for HawkScan, and hopefully you've gone ahead and cloned the Java Spring Vulny repo. So this is our application that we're going to be testing. So let me just show you what I've done. I'm using VS Code as my IDE. I've got a terminal window here. I'm going to go ahead and take down my composition, and what we want to do is build our application. Actually, before we do that, I want to show you how to get logged into StackHawk. We need a StackHawk account, and we're going to set up a configuration file for our scan. So head on over to app.stackhawk.com, and you can hit new here, sign up for an account. I'm going to sign up with one of my Google accounts, which I recommend if you've got one. I'll use that one. So when you log in for the first time, you'll get this little welcome screen. You can give your organization whatever name. The organization name sort of assumes that you might have a team someday that you want to work with. Third-party account access, Google, and so forth. Welcome to StackHawk. So next, we're going to choose which plan we want to use. You can go pro. I recommend that you do a free account. So it's free for life. You can use one app. This also has access to some of the pro features for 14 days. Hit continue. There's an option to use some test data from Google Firing Range, which is like a gigantic vulnerable application in the sky. But we want to scan our own application today. We'll be scanning this Java Spring Vulny app. So select that and continue. We get another welcome to StackHawk, and we're going to walk through the getting started flow, which is going to help us set up our first StackHawk.yaml config file. Get started. Okay, first off, we're generating an API key. So this is an API key that you need to supply to the scanner every time you run it so that it can communicate back to the platform. So I'm going to copy this. And what I'd recommend is that in your repository directory, you create a .env file and you save it in there as a line like this. And then you can go back to it and find it. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in to the chat. That's my API key. I'm going to delete this account later so I don't get scammed. But you should have something like that, and you should run that command so that you've got that exported as an environment variable. We use that later when we run the scanner. Okay, so we've got our API key. It recommends that you create this directory, and you can if you want to. I'm not going to, it's not really necessary. The important part is that you've saved your API key. Next, we'll create a new application in the platform. So I'm going to call it Java Volney. You can call it whatever you like. This is just so that the platform can track it. Risk level, low, it's a test app. Data type, unknown, it's a test app. It's not really necessary that you get these right. It's just used for sort of reporting later on. It doesn't affect the scan in any way.
And Zach, I just want to pause for 1 second so we can give people a chance to catch up. I know we're going through a lot. Just since this is going to be such a key part of what we're going through, a great way for people also to get their hands on that StackHawk swag. Just to make sure everybody has the chance to get going with this StackHawk sign up as you get going. So
yeah.
Hopefully everyone's able to catch up here with just that brief pause. They're at that create an app phase. I just want to make sure everybody's following along. Thanks, Zach.
Cool. Yeah, I'll try and slow it down. I get so excited.
Hard not to when it comes to authenticated security testing.
Tell me about it. All right, so next we're going to select an environment. And this concept is all about, for each application, we're going to store your scan results in the platform by environment. So for each app, there's going to be development environment. That's what I would recommend choosing as a default. But we're going to create some new environments along the way. It's arbitrary. The names don't really matter. The host that we're going to scan is, for this application in particular, is actually HTTPS. That's important because it does have a self-signed cert. It's localhost, port 9000. Hit next. It will create the application. In the background, you can see it's created the application in our applications section, and it's created this card that sort of shows a summary of scan results. Don't have any results yet. It also shows our application ID. So each application that we create is going to have one of these UUIDs. And you can copy that also and maybe save it in your environment file if you like. I'd call it app ID and save it there. But you can always get access to this again. You don't need to save it. You can find it in the platform. Then finally, we are going to record this. Had a question in chat. We will record this, I believe. So I'm going to download the StackHawk YAML file, the configuration file that it created. I'm going to open it in my local editor, Atom. And you should have something that looks like this too. So there's a bunch of commented out text just to give you an idea of what kind of configuration options there are. I just want to take this and copy it over. So this is the minimal configuration file for a scan. And this is essentially what we will use. Yours is going to only differ in the application ID. Yours will be different. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my IDE and paste that into my StackHawk YAML configuration file over here. So I did one earlier. I'm going to replace the results You may have an existing one from your repository. I'm just going to delete that stuff out so it's clean and neat. It's the way I like things. So there we go. Got the StackHawk YAML. I'm going to save that. And then let me go back to the slide, show you where we're at. So we just created this file. Yours is going to have your unique application ID. Now we want to bring up this Java Spring Vulny application. We're going to do that by just running docker compose up, -- build to build the image, -- detach so that once it's built it and it's running, it's going to give you your terminal back so you can run other commands. So I'll just do that. Make sure I don't have it running already. Good. Docker compose up, build, detach. And there it goes. So it's, by the way, if you have an older version of Docker Compose, it might be Docker - compose.
Perfect. And I think people are catching up a little, Zach. So we'll give them one more sec. Let me come up to speed.
Cool.
As this runs.
All right, to sort of summarize where we've gone, we have cloned this Java Spring Vulny repository, and that's up at the very tip top of the chat. We've got those prerequisites. So we've got Docker, we've got Docker Compose, we've cloned this Java Spring Vulny repo. I'm working from within that repo directory now. And I just ran, let's see, I went through the StackHawk getting started flow. And I just ran Docker Compose up to bring this test application up so it's running. Now that it's running, I can say Docker PS and I can see that I've got that image running and it's listening on port 9000. And in my browser, I can go to it. Localhost port 9000. And there we are. This is what the application looks like, completely academic, not very exciting. So this has a self-signed certificate, and this might be trouble for some folks. If you are having trouble with this, I've found that Firefox works best for me. It doesn't complain too much. It lets me get past the sort of warning screen. If you need to use Chrome or Safari or other browsers, you may need to add the certificate to your trusted root store. Where that certificate is under source main, resources, and then there's this file here called javavulny.crt. And on the Mac, if I reveal this in the Finder, you can right-click on it, open with, so here's that javavulny.crt file. You can open with keychain access and add it to any one of these keychains, should be fine. And then it should be usable now. But if I go into keychain, so I go into keychain access, you just want to right click on that, or let's see. Get info. Go to this little trust box here. I know this is tiny, but once you click into the cert from keychain access, you just want to make sure that secure sockets layer SSL is set to always trust. But again, if you just use Firefox, you shouldn't have to go through this hassle. Okay, hopefully folks are still with us. Okay, let's see, where are we at? So here's the application, port 9000. Next step, we are going to run an unauthenticated scan. We've got our simple config for that. And here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to export our API key. and then going to run the scanner, and we're going to include the API key on the command line so that it has access to that. So I'm going to copy this from previously just to eliminate the chance of error. Okay, so actually, so I've already exported my API key. It's just this command line here that we did before. And here's the Docker command. Docker run -t for TTY, so it spits output to the screen. -e for environment variable API key, so it sends that in to the scanner. And then this -v to volume mount the current directory to the /hawk directory within the container. And then finally, we're running the container called image called StackHawk /hawkscan. We'll run that. It begins by authenticating to the platform. Gives you a little summary of what we're running, StackHawk hawkscan. We are reading this environment variable, or excuse me, this configuration file. We're in the development environment. We are scanning localhost 9000. Gives us a link to our scan results. So we can click through to that, or you can just go to the platform. Actually, I don't trust that. I don't know what browser that's going to open. But if I go into the platform and head over to this scans tab here, see that the scan has already started, got a little progress bar. I can click into it. And we see a plugin summary. Here's the plugins that it's starting to run. Here are the findings that it has found so far. These plugins, by the way, are those sets of probes. So it's looking for specific kinds of vulnerabilities or classes of vulnerabilities, letting us know where it's gone. As it started up, the scanner spidered the site, crawled the site looking for paths to probe, and this is what it found. And then under findings, this is what it's found so far. So that'll continue along. While that's running, I'm going to go over to this applications page. And again, here's the card, and it's starting to fill in results for the application in the development environment. And we'll see more of that later. So it looks good. That's a normal scan. As you can see, it's finding some stuff. I don't want to go into too much detail. Definitely look at this later, but we've got a lot to roll through. Suffice to say, these are real issues that it found with the application. Okay, so that's our unauthenticated scan that we just ran. Let me pause here for questions.
I think, Aaron's working with a few folks, but if you are scanning and you run into an error message regarding kind of the scanner's unable to access the specific port, the local host 9000 that we talked about, Zach, what should someone do?
I'm sorry, what should they do if they run into which error?
The unable to access the local host, or the host we had predetermined in that YAML config, the host 9000.
Oh, yeah. Well, that would probably indicate that the Docker container is not running. So did you find that when you tried to browse to it? So one thing to look for is HTTPS.
So it would be a scan error, Zach. So
okay.
The scan error showed that the scanner wasn't able to connect to the local host. So I think you're right. We need to make sure that the application is running so the scanner can connect to it.
Yeah. You can also kind of check this top section here to make sure that we've got the, the correct host.
Awesome.
But if you do a simple Docker PS, that will show you that the application that you want to connect to is running. If it's not running there, you need to try and run the command that will actually run the application.
And that was this command. And depending on which version of Docker Compose you have, it could be that command with a dash, Docker Compose.
We will get that into the chat. All right.
All right.
Let's keep going. We're here in the chat if you're running into problems.
Okay. So next step, we've got a simple unauthenticated scan. Let's move on to our first scenario, which is we've got a traditional form authentication and then a cookie authorization, just like a normal traditional web application. So let's try doing form authentication in the browser. So we'll go to localhost 9000 in your browser. And we've got these sections up here. This is the section we want, form auth. And what you want to do is just click into item search, find your fresh items here. And you should get challenged with the username and password form. So this is a traditional HTML form. The username is user, and the password is all lowercase password. And when you submit that, we get a search field. And you can search for item number 1, and you get a result, item number 1. It's the best. So that's form authentication. Let's try that again. Let's sign out. And let's turn on our developer tools so we can see what's going on in the background. Web developer tools, I am on the network tab. And within the network tab, I want to look at all transactions. And so I'm going to refresh this page. And it shows me that it went to localhost on localhost / and I got a status code 200, and that's this page right here. When I click this button, I get a new set of pages. So I've got the search, and then it redirects me to a login. So I get a 302 here. It redirects me to login, so I can log in and get access to that protected content. And that's this field right here. In the response, if I look at the raw output, you can find that there's this form here. It's the form action. That's this form right here. The code behind it says, hey, when I hit submit, I want to go to the /login page, and I'm going to post these fields, which include the username and the password, and a hidden field called _CSRF, which is an anti-cross-site request forging token. And it's a random value that only you and the server know, so that it can make sure that you're the person that submitted this form, not some intruder. So that's important information to have. The username and password field and the CSRF parameter. So when I enter my content, when I enter my username and password here and hit submit, we make some more requests. And the key request is this one here, the very first one. It's a post. And that post goes to /login. So this path is important to keep in mind. And when I posted that, the request that I included was these fields, the _CSRF, username and password. If I look at that raw, you can see that's like traditional parameters. sent as a post. In response, I got a cookie back. That's this JSession ID cookie. And the value of it is this new random value. So this is the session cookie that the server is using to authorize me. So every time I make requests in the future, I should be sending that same cookie back to the server so it can identify me and confirm that I am who I say I am. And you can see that on the very next request, a GET request for the search field. And the request cookies that I sent in include the JSession ID, which is the same value. So that's my authorization section. And then, if I hit search and I get results, same thing. I'm posting search requests like that search text, and I'm sending the same cookie in every time. So it has authorized me. Okay, so we've grabbed a lot of information through this process. Now we're going to convert that into a new configuration file. So what I want you to do is create a new configuration file called StackHawk-form-cookie.yaml. And this is going to be additive to the previous configuration that we created. We're going to just copy and paste this into the chat. And I think we could go ahead and copy paste that into the chat right now. So you can go ahead and add this to your repository. So again, you're creating a brand new file, StackHawk-form-cookie.yaml. And this is the contents. So I'm going to walk through what these contents mean. So first, so app is, again, the application configuration. I'm going to create a new environment so that this shows up in a different environment in the platform, call it form cookie. Exclude paths, we're going to exclude the logout path because if we hit that, it's going to log us out and then we won't be authenticated anymore. That anti-CSRF parameter, we need to note that with the anti-CSRF param element. And then we go to an authentication section. Under authentication, so this part right here, username, password, that is our authentication component of our authn, authz config. So we've got a form configuration. The path to that is /login. The login page is at /login as well. And that's important so the scanner can find that CSRF token, the value, it needs to record that value. The field, the username and password fields are called username and password, which we discovered from the web developer tools. The scan username is user and password is password. Okay, so we've authenticated with this section, and then we get to the authorization section. So the cookie names that we're expecting to be set is JSession ID, and a test path that we can test to verify that we're authenticated is /search. And if we hit that and we're authenticated, we should get a status code 200 response. So this is a regex, and you could look for anything you want. There might be reply headers or even body contents that you could look for, but this is a pretty common one. Finally, as the scan progresses, it's going to check every once in a while to see if you're logged in or not. So we have a logged in indicator. So if it finds the word sign out on the page, it assumes that you're logged in. That won't be present. The sign out button will not be present if you are not authenticated. And then normally, a lot of times, your application will have a logged out indicator like a sign in button. Our app doesn't have that, so I just put in some random text here. We just want to make sure that this doesn't get triggered. If it does, the scanner will assume you're logged out, and it will try and go back through this authentication flow. All right, so you should have that configuration file ready. And if you do, then you can run the same Docker command as before to run your scan. This time you're going to specify your configuration files. So specify StackHawk.yaml first, and then StackHawk form cookie.yaml second. And what's going to happen is it's going to overlay them. So it's going to take this file and it's going to overlay the contents of this file onto them. So I think I have already cooked up my form cookie configuration and it's ready to go. So I'll run the same scan as before. I want to make this a one-liner. So Docker run, sending in the API key, StackHawk /hawkscan, StackHawk.yaml is my first configuration file, and excuse me, StackHawk -form -cookie is my second config file. Hit run, and we're off to the races. Go through the pre-scan validation. Now, if you got anything about the authentication incorrect here, you should get an error immediately if it's unable to authenticate. It's the first thing that the scanner will try to do. So that worked. Authentication succeeded. Test path matched. Now it's going through the same process as before. Now the spider has crawled 31 URLs. It's found a lot more than it did before. If I go back to StackHawk, you should see that scan has started. Last time we only got 11 paths. This time we got 31. So we're already digging a lot deeper into the application. How's everybody doing out there? I know this is a lot of information that we're racing through. All right, scan complete. Uploading our data to the platform. Get a nice little summary of results. And we're done. So this time around, we found 31 instead of 11 paths, and lots of highs, more mediums, about the same number of lows. Cool. So again, you can go through and take a look at the results later on your own. I want to go ahead and continue on to our next section. And so the next section is going to be, so this is a scenario where we're doing a JSON post authentication, and then our authorization flow is going to be using a bearer token. So this is more typical of modern single page applications, where you've got like a React or Angular front end, and it's interacting with a RESTful API backend. So in our application, again, we're going to go to localhost 9000. We'll go over to this section called JWT Auth. That's a JSON Web Token authentication. And I've already authenticated earlier, so I need to log out. I'm going to sign out of the form auth as well. So I'm in JWT Auth, and I don't have a local JWT token set. So I'm going to log in, and I still have my developer tools open, so I'm watching network transactions. So I hit login, get a little JavaScript pop-up box, a little Ajax style form, enter my user name, which is user, and my password, which is password. Hit login, 200 success, that's right here. Close this box. So that post that I sent in, if I look at the headers for this post, you can see it's an XHR request. It sent a post to this endpoint on the application server, RESTful endpoint. And let's see, what we sent in was this JSON blob under the request tab. So it's pure JSON, and it's basically just username user and password equals password. So that's what we need to keep in mind. The response that we got was another JSON blob. The server sent back to us this JSON blob which says, hey, username user, your JOT token is this value right here. So, so this information is important as well. We need to know that the scanner needs to be looking for a response JSON blob that includes this key called token, and the value of that token is going to be your actual token that it needs to send in. So let's see how we do that in the configuration file. So again, we're going to create a whole new file, StackHawk JSON token. And this file is going to look much the same. So we're going to create a new environment called JSON token to segregate the results from this mode of scanning. So this is a new field here, API:/OpenAPI. And what this is, this application has an OpenAPI spec. So it's like a Swagger doc. And it basically defines all of the endpoints, all the API endpoints that are available on this service. So we're going to use that instead of the normal spider to find all of our routes, since this is acting in a RESTful API mode. Then we'll move on to the authentication section. And again, this section looks much the same, except that instead of a form type authentication, we're using JSON type. We've got a new login path /API JWT auth sign in. And we could go ahead and paste this into the chat for people to start setting this file up. Username field and the username password fields and scan username, scan password fields are the same as before, but this will come in the form of a JSON blob when we post it to the API service. And then there's this token extraction phase where it looks at the result, that JSON blob that we get back as a result. We're looking for the token path, and that's called token. Just like that. And so that's where it knows where to find the token. Finally, token authorization. So in future requests, as it goes back to the API server, it proves that it is authorized by sending in an authorization header, and the token type is bearer. And so it'll just add that to every request. And I want to show you what that looks like from the developer tools as well. So when we posted, we got that token back. Now we can do an item search. Hit search, we get results. Here is that search request that I just made, also an XHR request. When we sent it in, we sent along this request set of request headers. And I should have, yeah, there we go. This authorization header, bearer token, and there's the value of that big giant token that we got back. If we didn't have that, of course, that would not work. Okay, so we've got our token authorization header defined. And then again, we've got a test path. This is a different search path to test that we're authenticated or not. We expect a 200 OK status code. And we've got the same logged in and logged out indicators as before. All right, so let's try creating that file, and we will run that scan. I have pre-baked my copy of that file. Same contents. And I will run the same thing. This time I've got the StackHawk original configuration, and we're overlaying on top of that this new JSON token configuration. Hit run. Also in mine, and the one that we pasted in, we disabled the normal traditional web app spider. It's just to speed up the scan a little bit. All it needs is the OpenAPI config. While this is running, let me show you what that OpenAPI config looks like. If I go to /open API on the app, it returns this giant JSON blob, which just describes all of the paths that we have and what you can expect to be able to do with each of these paths. I can get from this search path. I can add arbitrary text into the search path to search for items at that path, and so forth. And this is a more efficient way for the scanner to discover what routes it should be scanning. When I go back to the StackHawk platform, I should see our new scan just started in the JSON token environment. Click into it. It found 21 paths. These are all API-ish. These are all API-like paths that it found from the Open API spec. It's already starting to find findings. Again, hopefully that worked for you. If you have any trouble with this, if your configuration didn't work, if your authentication didn't succeed, go ahead and ask questions. We can help out. So I'm going to race through. I know our time is limited. I just want to touch on the next subject, unless there's any questions about this form of authentication and authorization.
I haven't seen anything come through, but feel free to post those. We'll get you answers. Cool.
All right, so the final scenario that I wanted to race through, and maybe I'll just do this as kind of a demo. It's actually a simpler configuration to configure for StackHawk, but it can be a little bit harder to pull off. So in this scenario, we're doing external authentication with some third party, and then we're expecting to get a bearer token back, just like our previous scenario. And I'm cheating on this one. I'm going to do the external authentication flow through the same app, doing the same thing that HawkScan just did with our test app. So basically, I'm just going to do what it did, and I'm going to do this curl request. And if you have curl on your machine, you can try this same curl request. Basically, all it's doing is, so curl is a little text mode API tester or web browser, really text mode web browser. So I'm going to run curl. I'm going to send in a post request, post type request to this URL, localhost API jot auth sign in. So that's the same sign in input point. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm sending in this header to say what I'm about to send you or post to you is a JSON blob. And the JSON blob that I'm going to send you is the same one that we sent before. Password equals password, username equals user. I'm going to add this silent flag to not spit out a bunch of information I don't want to see. And I'm going to do insecure because this is an HTTPS endpoint with a self-signed cert. So if I do that, go find my pre-canned command. So if I do that, what you get back is this JSON blob, which is the same thing that we saw in the developer tools in the browser. Username equals user is the response, and your token is this giant token. And further, so this is the token that you need to enter into your configuration. So if I go back here, this is what our configuration would look like. Create a new file, StackHawk external token, a new environment, external JWT. Again, we're going to use the Open API spec to determine our routes. And now our authentication section has no authentication component. It's all authorization at this point. So from our external tool, from our external authentication provider, we should have gotten a token, and the value of it should be this giant token here. And so that's what you would plug in here. Although a better way to go about this, of course, is to put a variable in here called auth token, for instance. So you can dynamically generate this with a script before you run the scan, and then just feed it into the scan with this environment variable. Then we'll do a token authorization, same as before. It's a bearer token. Name of the header is called authorization. Test path is the same as before, and the logged in, logged out indicators are the same as before. I actually have a script, and you'll find it in this repository under scripts called JSON auth. And so that does the same thing that I just did at the command line. Then it pipes it through JQ or JSON query, so that it extracts just the token. If you have JQ installed, you should be able to run, and curl, you should be able to run this script. And what you'll get is just the pure token. So if I said export, first of all, I need that configuration file. I'm going to go ahead and create that configuration file for StackHawk. Call it StackHawk dash, what do we call it? External token. .yaml. In there, got the same stuff we just talked about, including the variable for auth token. And now I can say export auth token equals the results of this script, which goes and grabs a token. Just to verify, we've got that value in the auth token variable. And now I can run the scan. So this is going to be the same as before. I'm going to use the new file, external token. And I need to feed in, I actually got this wrong in the paste. I need to feed in this auth token variable so that the scanner has access to it. Run that. Fingers crossed. I didn't test this as well as the other ones. But let's see if the authentication succeeded. Spider complete. Yeah, looks like it's working. Anyway, it will scan. We should get scan results later. That's kind of our time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much. My name is Zach. You can reach me at Zachary@stackhawk.com or on Twitter at zconger. Of course, you can check out StackHawk at stackhawk.com.
Yes, and we will be sending out a copy of this recording as well as some helpful resources, links to the repo, those sorts of things. So if you weren't able to kick off that scan or get it completed successfully today, hopefully those resources will help. If you have any questions, and as Zach mentioned, feel free to shoot him an email, or I'm sure Aaron Neff would also be happy to help you. It's aaron.neff@stackhawk.com. And otherwise, thank you all so much for coming. It was great having you here for the workshop, and we hope to see you again soon. So, thanks, everybody.
Yep.